Bonjour. We're going to talk about real world evidence today in oncology and patient reported outcome with Renee Pierson, who spent 10 years at J&J building a very exciting career in that field. And so we'll have 15 minutes with her to discuss this important topic. This is Bruno LARVOL, and you're listening to LARVOL Oncology Data, our weekly get together to talk about anything having to do with data and cancer. Renee, bonjour, and welcome to the podcast.
Bonjour, Bruno. Bonjour from an American with a French name.
Yes, I've got people in my family named Renee. Do you usually put the accent on it or never?
Yes,
Yes,
I,
okay,
I, I do.
yes. So there's some before we talk about real world evidence and patient reporting outcome, and I'll ask you to define that. Most of the audience knows it, but it would still be useful. I've got something else to say. Uh, Renee was, when we started the company, one of our very, very first customer. And so she saw us evolved and she helped us also evolve over the years. So I want really to thank you for your early support and be an early believer in our enterprise, Renee. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, you are most welcome. And I'm very, very honored to be here. I've seen the full journey as one of your early clients back in the early 2000s. It's hard to believe we go back to 2004. But to see how things started out with a few therapeutic areas and the move to oncology is just phenomenal. The growth that your company has experienced and the success. So I'm very proud to be still working with you after this time. You've done a great job.
Well, thank you. And you said the growth of oncology, and that's something that always amazes me how oncology really became half of healthcare, or certainly half of all clinical trials. Right? And it's a sign that there's a lot to be done. And obviously, the human need, the medical need, is so big that you create more survival, more quality of life, and then there's need for continuously improving it. And maybe that's a segue now to the topic today, which is patient reported outcome and real world evidence. Let's start by defining our terms for people listening that might not be very familiar with that important aspect of research.
Sure. In terms of patient-reported outcomes, I view my role as ensuring that the patient voice is captured within the clinical trial. That's truly the essence of what we do, to make sure that we capture signs and symptoms of what's going on in that patient in a particular trial. And these days, that really is focused in on oncology. It's clearly our biggest area of priority these days.
So, patient-reported outcome means what it means. The patient himself or herself enters data into some type of electronic data capture
Yes. Yeah.
portal
And
or form.
initially they entered it on paper and pencil, and it was very archaic. And we were very slow to move to electronic capture, but either the patient or the caregiver will input how they're feeling and function in terms of their symptoms of pain, or if they're having a cough or dyspnea or whatever the particular symptom related to the disease may be. And, we're looking to see if we are maintaining symptoms over time or if there is some lessening, to show a treatment benefit, really. That's what it's all about, to show a treatment benefit through patient-reported outcomes.
Um, is it fair to say that PRO is under real world evidence? It's a subset. Is that a fair
I
point?
think that's very fair. It may be organized differently in different companies, and at J&J, it's a very decentralized company, and we have a department that is within the larger market access group, and we work very closely because PRO has grown in importance. Our external agencies, such as EMEA And FDA, I mean, they are clearly very interested in what the patient has to say, and it's become very important in terms of endpoints, clinical outcomes assessments.
Mm. One of the, I assume, challenge in measuring patient voice is the fuzziness sometimes of perceived experience, and trying to make quantitative an experience that by nature is, I would say, qualitative. Is that true? Number one, and if so, how did you, in your role at J&J, how did you face that, and was it an important topic for you?
You've raised an excellent point. It's extremely difficult to quantify clinically meaningful, significant change. And over time, we've enlisted more and more psychometricians within the department. So they're statistically trained to capture that quantifiable change and on scale of, say, 1 to 5, a scale going from a 2 to a 2.5 or a 2.8. That's what that group does for us. They capture that clinically meaningful change. And to your point too, we also do look at qualitative data. We conduct interviews with patients of a qualitative nature. And that whole area has also grown quite a bit, in that it's more about their experience within the clinical trial.
And so, first, both Shahir and I now have a new word to use. I want to make sure I say it right. Psychometry.
Psychometrician. It's a
Psychometrician.
difficult word, but it's a very important evolving science. They are, I guess, trained in psychology and metrics. And
Yes.
psychometrician is the name of the very important job that people do. And it's very hot right now. If you're a psychometrician, you're in great demand.
So I'm gonna. My son is heading to college soon. I'm gonna say, Bradlin, one word, psychometrician.
Yes, yes. No one will quite understand what he does, but he will be very, very popular.
That will make him popular. I'm preparing to become a psychometrician. That sounds like a magician a little bit.
Yeah, a
Now,
magician with numbers.
magician number. You cannot make up numbers, though,
No.
of course. And that's an opportunity to salute again Shahir Sheikh, our producer extraordinaire, who was there in the background. When I talk with him, I like to look up. I don't know why, but it feels like he's in the cloud, making sure we organize. Thank you, Shahir. Now, quality of life. That's, of course, another term used a lot. Quality of life metrics. That's overlap a little bit with PRO. It's not quite the same. How does it play? Is there, for example, part of patient-reported outcome that don't have to do with quality of life, or is it that by definition, quality of life and PRO are essentially overlapping?
There is definitely an overlap, and we describe patient-reported outcomes as healthcare-related quality of life, because quality of life is a very broad term. It could be quality of life dealing with your finances, quality of life in other aspects beyond healthcare. So we're really focused in PRO on the healthcare-related aspect in terms, again, of your symptoms and your functioning. And what's really important in oncology, it's all about survival. We always say that that's critical. So once you're surviving, then it's about how you feel and function, and that's where quality of life comes in. It's again not as high in importance in oncology because you have to survive.
I assume that could be measured in a clinical trial, in a registrational clinical trial, or later on in other type of trials, perhaps more oriented towards market access, making the case for the drug once it's approved. When you worked at J&J, were you working on both sides, or primarily on the market access side of things?
really, the market access side, we started working on trials in phase 2 and phase 3, and not so much in phase 4 once they're on the market. So it's really that area where you're designing the actual endpoints is where we were focused, working with the clinicians and making sure that we included PRO measures along with the clinical measures.
Oh, interesting. So, and that actually is surprising to me a little bit. So, I want to have a follow-up question on this. So, the market access studies or endpoints or activity related to a drug will actually not be so much in a phase 4, but a lot of it will be in phase 2 and 3. In my mind, the phase 4 is to support market access by measuring things like quality of life. So, what am I getting wrong? I guess in
Yes,
my
I
thinking.
think that's true of phase 4, but where we're focused in on when we're launching a drug, we want to get reimbursement, and we want to get reimbursement right at launch. So that's where we're working closely with our European agencies and with US agencies to make sure that we have those quality of life endpoints included, and that maybe they even get a labeling claim at launch about how you're doing with your symptoms in
Yeah.
oncology.
Um, so sometimes quality of life could even be part of a secondary endpoint in the trial,
Absolutely.
um, and
It,
it
it,
often is, perhaps.
it can definitely be a secondary endpoint. Oftentimes that's where we end up, which is a good place. And on certain therapeutic categories, it can even be a primary endpoint.
Okay.
For example, in the area of overactive bladder, there are certain categories that lend themselves to how the patient is feeling and functioning, and the PRO would be a primary
Yeah.
endpoint.
It's probably not the case or exceptional in oncology, I assume. In oncology, overall
Yeah,
survival or
exactly.
progression-free survival is still typically the
In
primary.
oncology, we're very lucky if we're a secondary endpoint. Very happy if we're a secondary endpoint,
Okay.
really.
Yeah, because the agencies would say, well, um, we first care about survival, then we care about progression of the disease, and then maybe quality of life. Although some of these drugs have a lot of toxicity and quality of life implication, but the agencies have not been as receptive as having them as secondary.
Yeah, that you raised another good point, because the agencies, for example, the National Cancer Institute, they have created a PRO measure around toxicity called the PRO CTCAE. There is actually a physician measure, CTCAE, which is common terminology of cancer adverse events. So they flip it and they get the patient to measure the toxicities that they're feeling. So in addition to what we're hoping to see in terms of treatment benefit, there is a PRO measure specifically designed at looking at the toxicity.
Okay. So we gotta, believe it or not, get close to the end of the podcast. And what we do typically, we ask our guests to make a takeaway statement. If someone was sleeping for the whole the whole 15 minutes and just catch your last minute, um, what will be the message, the statement, or the prediction, or the advice, or anything you'd like to say as a takeaway related to oncology and PRO?
Well, clearly for me, in my background and even what I do now in the medical field, is really pay attention to the voice of the patient, because it's becoming more and more important in everything that we do. Um, the government agencies, the payers, everyone within the oncology realm, they're listening to the patient. And that's something that should not be dismissed or missed in the data that you capture. It's very critical to hear that patient voice.
Renee, you give me an idea for
Good.
We're measuring the voice of the oncologist on social media. It's actually a big part of what we do. Maybe we should try to apply the same methodology to measure the voice of the patient on social media. Now, of course, it's a filtered voice, but the same way we have key opinion leaders, we could try, Shahir, make sure we look at it. We
Yes.
could try to measure the voice of not all, but leading, influencing patient leaders. Some of them being patient scientists, by the way. They go very deep in understanding the data, obviously.
Absolutely, Bruno. I think you're onto an excellent idea. With patient advocates, there's so much that can be done in terms of measuring that, and you have the tools to do it and the know-how. I'm sure you can do an excellent job of it.
Well, Renee, merci and au
Merci
revoir.
beaucoup.